Okay, I couldn't leave you hanging at that part. This is the rest of chapter 25. For a few minutes, nothing much happened. The judges preoccupied themselves with examining the scrolls. Gregor shifted his weight slightly from side to side. The rope was really biting into his wrists. He wondered if he could ask them to cut it loose or if that would be a major breach of court behavior. Well, it was worth a try. "Excuse me, Your Honor?" The judges looked at him in surprise. "Yes, Overlander? Do you think you could untie us now? I'm losing fingers in my feelings." And they knotted the rope right over one of my squid-sucker sores. You can't see it, but Ares' whole back is covered with open wounds from those flesh-eating mites that killed Pandora. And Howard and Andromeda are pretty beat up, too. Even if she said no, Gregor was still glad he'd spoken. He wanted them to know, all these idiots packing the seats waiting for his death sentence, that he and Ares and Howard and Andromeda were the ones who had been out risking their lives. Suddenly, he couldn't wait to testify. "Did Marith make it?" he asked. Howard's tormented face broke into a brief smile. "Yes, he will mend." "I can't believe you kept him alive after that serpent attack," said Gregor. He said serpent attack extra loud to make sure everyone had heard, then turned back to the front before anyone could tell him to shut up. A guard hurried into the room and whispered something to the head judge. "Very well," he said. "We will begin." She cleared her throat and read off the series of charges against the defendants. The language was pretty complicated, but all seemed to boil down to the fact that Gregor hadn't killed the Bane and nobody else had either. The head judge finished the list of charges and looked up. "We will now question those on trial." "Can I go first?" It burst out of Gregor before he could stop it, but suddenly he knew he had to. He could sense that Howard, Ares, and probably Andromeda were already convinced they were guilty. If they got up on the stand, they might not be able to defend themselves. He, on the other hand, was absolutely bubbling over with the injustice of the whole thing. "Overlander," the judge said firmly, "it's not our custom to shout inquiries during a trial, especially one so serious in nature." "Sorry," Gregor said, but he didn't hang his head or look away. "What should I do if I have a question? Raise my hand? I mean, I don't have a lawyer or anything, right?" "Raising your hand should be sufficient," the head judge said, ignoring his lawyer question. He thought about raising his hand and asking if he could go first again, but that might seem snotty. Whether it was because he had asked or because he was already slated to do so, Gregor was called to the stand. He climbed the steps to the cube. It was designed so people could see any twitch, any shift in the defendant's body language. He felt very exposed. Gregor expected to be bombarded with questions like you saw on TV, but the judges merely settled in their seats and looked at him. "Tell us, then," said the head judge. "Tell us about your journey." This threw him a little. Where do you want me to start?" "From the day you sailed away from Regalia," said the head judge. So he did. He told a story, and every chance he got, he made sure to emphasize the courage the others on trial had shown. When he got to the part of the tankard, he said, "I made Howard leave. I didn't have any choice. He was going to fight him if I was going to fight him if he tried to come with us. I'd have fought Andromeda too. She knew that. That's why they went home. How could they risk injuring me when I had to kill the Bane?" "And why did you not want them to accompany you?" Gregor had a moment of confusion. "Because I don't know, we needed to get Marith back for one thing, and I didn't want a whole bunch of people in that maze, I guess. I wanted my family to know what had happened to my sister and me if I didn't come back. And because he spun back in his mind to the cave, to the ice that had engulfed him. Because the Bane was mine." A gasp rose from the crowd at his insolence. "What do you mean the Bane was yours?" asked the Bat. "It was mine to kill. That's what your prophecy says, right? I'm the guy who's supposed to kill it. In the end, it was always my job, and it was my call who I wanted to take into the maze, not yours. Anyway, if you kill Howard and Andromeda because they came back, that's just a murder. No one could have done better than they did." He looked over to where the others stood. It was hard to read Andromeda, but she did shake her wings a little. Howard's lips silently formed a couple words. Gregor was pretty sure they were "thank you." Maybe he'd made a convincing enough argument to keep them alive. "Go on with your story. What happened after your company parted ways?" said the head judge. Gregor took a deep breath. This part was going to be harder. He told about entering the labyrinth, having to leave Twitch-Tip behind, finding the cone, and witnessing the bloody fight between Goldshard and Snare. There was reaction from the crowd again. Gregor suspected they were happy Snare was dead. Just then Nerissa appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on Vicus's arm. Her coronation gown was lopsided, and stray braids hung out of her hairdo. There was not even a suggestion of a crown. No tiara, no gold band on her head. She kept squinting as if she were in bright sunlight. It took Vicus and a pair of guards to help her onto the throne. She swayed slightly, even when she was seated, as if at any moment she might plunge to the ground. Queen Nerissa, are you well enough to attend this trial? The head judge asked in a neutral tone. Oh yes, I've seen myself here before, although I do not know the outcome. This was the sort of stuff that made everyone think she was crazy. Maybe someone ought to tell her to keep her visions under her hat, crown, whatever. The charge is treason? She asked doubtfully, and Gregor realized she had no idea what was going on. The head judge rose slowly. Yes, the defendants are on trial for treason. Nerissa stood at an empty spot in the wall for a moment and shook her head. Forgive me, I've only just awoken. Do you wish us to begin the proceedings again? Asked the judge. Oh no, please continue, said Nerissa. She knotted up her hands in her skirt, hiking it above her knees. Another braid sprang free from its pins and fell down the side of her face. Her whole body was shaking. The head judge looked over at Vicus, who avoided his gaze and busied himself placing a cloak around Nerissa's shoulder. The queen gave him a smile. I wish I had some soup. Oh, gee, said Gregor. She wasn't going to help her case any. The head judge turned to Gregor. So after this fight between the Gnawers, Goldshard and Snare, what occurred next? Gregor tried to regain his focus. So then we heard a scratching in one of the tunnels, and we knew it was the Bane. But the tunnel was small. Ares couldn't fit into it. I had to leave him in the cone. I went down the tunnel. I was ready to kill it. Then, when I found the Bane, it started crying and yelling, Mama. And I mean, if you told me it was like a 10-foot rat, I guess I didn't know or whatever, but I wasn't expecting a baby. Nerissa flew to her feet. A baby? Yes, it was a baby rat, said Gregor, surprised she was following along. She stumbled down the steps and came reeling around the table, her skirt twisted up in one hand, and while the other waved wildly. Oh, warrior, warrior, she cried frantically as she lurched at him. He was torn between trying to catch her and just getting out of her way. Right before she made it to the cube, he leapt off and grabbed her by the shoulders. The icy fingers of her free hand clutched the neck of his shirt. Oh, you did not kill it, did you? No, Nerissa, I didn't kill it, he said, totally baffled. I couldn't. She heaved a huge shuddering sigh and sank down to the ground at his feet, laughing in relief. Oh, oh, she patted her knee reassuringly. Then we all may yet be saved. Chapter 26. She sat on the floor, rocking back and forth, laughing, the very picture of madness. Somebody needs to help this girl, thought Gregor. Vicus came and crouched beside her on the floor. Nerissa, perhaps you should rest longer. Are you feeling ill? No, I am well. We are all well, said Nerissa. The warrior has fulfilled the prophecy. No, Nerissa, he did not succeed in killing the Bane. Vicus, she said gently, the baby lives. So lives the warrior's heart. The Gnawers do not have their key to power. Vicus looked like a lightning bolt had hit him. He sat down on the floor next to her. This is what sandwich meant? We never considered it. What? Said Gregor. He wasn't sure what was going on. The baby in the prophecy was never your sister. It was the Bane, said Vicus. The Bane? Why would it kill my heart if the Bane died? Why did you not drain its light? Said Vicus. Because it's a baby, said Gregor. It's the most evil thing. I mean, if you can kill a baby, what can't you do? So says your heart. So says your most essential part, said Nerissa. Gregor took a few steps back and sat on the cube. Nerissa's meaning was slowly dawning on him. Die the baby, die his heart, die his most essential part. So if he killed the baby, that would be like killing his heart. His most essential part was that he had spared the Bane. If he had killed it, he never would have been the same. He would have lost himself forever. You know, Vicus said to Nerissa, I'm continually amazed by how badly we interpret one of Sandwich's prophecies. Then the moment is understood. The whole thing is clear as water, agreed Nerissa. Vicus quoted a section from the prophecy. What could turn the warrior weak? What do burning Gnawers seek? Just a barely speaking pup who holds the land of under up. The Gnawers have always sought the Bane, said Vicus, who is just a barely speaking pup. Sandwich even went so far as to use the word pup, the Gnawers' own word for a baby. And the Bane hold the lands of under up, said Vicus, because if Gregor had killed it, continued Nerissa. Total war, said Vicus. Its death would have been enough to rally them. Taking that pup to Ripred was a stroke of genius, Gregor. Oh, they will not know how to parry that move. Queen Nerissa, are we to continue this trial? asked the head judge. Nerissa looked up as if she were surprised at her surroundings. Trial? For the warrior? Of course there will be no trial. He has saved the Underland. She got to her feet, using Vicus for support, and saw the other defendants staring at her. She gave them a small smile, but directed her next line at Ares. And all who help them are held in our highest regard. Ares ducked his head. Maybe it was a bow, or maybe he couldn't look at her. Will you dine with me, you four? You look half starved. It was kind of ironic coming from Nerissa, but a welcome invitation. Somewhat dazed by the recent turn of events, Gregor, Ares, Howard, and Andromeda straggled out to the courtroom after Nerissa. She led them to a small private dining room. The table could seat no more than 6. In one corner, water trickled in a fountain. Old tapestries hung on the walls. Gregor guessed the first Underlanders must have brought them from above, because they depicted scenes from the overland, not this dark world. It was a calming place. It's nice in here, said Gregor. Yes, said Nerissa, this is where I often take my meals. They all took seats. People brought in platters of elegant food, large fish stuffed with grain and herbs, tiny vegetables arranged in geometric patterns, steaming braided bread studded with fruit, paper-thin piles of roast beef, and Ripred's favorite, that shrimp and cream sauce. Heaping plates were placed in front of each of them. Do not suppose I always dine so sumptuously, said Nerissa. The food was prepared for the coronation. Please begin. Gregor lifted his bread, dipped it in cream sauce, and took a big bite. For a while they all concentrated on the food, except Nerissa, who seemed to be mostly rearranging hers. I'm afraid I'm a poor conversationalist, she said, even at my best, and at present grief for my cousin's fate had robbed me of what little I might venture to say. It's the same for all of us, said Howard sadly. No one has been spared. It was true. The journey to the labyrinth had given them all ample reason for grief. Gregor was glad that Nerissa acknowledged it, and they could continue in silence. After days of insufficient food, Gregor's stomach was soon heavy with the rich dishes before him. The others stopped eating as well. You would think they'd all be shoveling down 7 or 8 helpings, but it didn't work that way. Nerissa sent the 4 of them to the hospital. Andromeda and Howard hadn't received medical care or been allowed a bath either. When did you guys get back? Said Gregor. About 12 hours before you arrived. Andromeda was astonishing. She barely rested at all. When we landed, they took Meredith to the hospital and locked us up. I knew one of the guards. She whispered a word of Meredith's recovery to us, said Howard. At the hospital, all 4 of them were immediately sent to bathe. Gregor realized he must be knocking people over with the rotten egg smell. After several days, he didn't much notice it anymore. He sank into a tub and felt all his injuries abject. The squid sucker marks on his arms, his aching ribs, the bumps on his head from Ripred, various abrasions and bruises from the stoning, rope burns around his wrists. Wincing, he scrubbed himself down. It was lucky the bath water continually carried away by the current must have been the color of mud by the time he was through. The doctors treated his wounds. He spoke only when they asked him a direct question about his injury. When he finished, the others were waiting. I suppose we should all get some rest, said Howard. Is that safe? Said Gregor. No one answered. Their status and regalia was still foggy. Nurse had cleared them, but Gregor had a feeling plenty of people still thought they were guilty. I have a large chamber that will accommodate us. It is reserved for my family at all times, said Howard. At least we know we are safe with one another. They followed Howard back to his room. Gregor was glad he had offered. He didn't want to go back to the room he'd always shared with Boots here. Where's your family? Asked Gregor. They returned to the font a few days after we left. I expect they're trying to travel here now, as I am, as I was on trial for treason. As I was on trial for treason. Howard's family had several chambers reserved for them. It was like a small apartment of connecting rooms, but they all gathered to sleep in the one that the kids shared. Howard and Gregor took beds next to each other. Ares and Andromeda huddled together in the space between them. To sleep, then, said Howard. The bats dropped off almost instantly. Howard tossed and turned a while, but Gregor could hear his breathing slow down and become rhythmic. He lay in bed wishing sleep would carry him away, but it wouldn't come. What would happen now? He guessed he would be allowed to go home, probably pretty soon. Then there would be his family to face, and life without Boots, it still wasn't quite real. It would be, when he was back in the apartment looking at her bed, her toys, her cardboard box of books. Gregor thought of the clothes sitting in the museum. He didn't want to leave them here for the people to poke through. He grabbed a torch off the wall and left Howard's room.